From Penn State University, this is Pennsylvania Inside Out, connecting communities to a world of creativity and knowledge. Here's tonight's host, Kevin Conaway.
Good evening. Coming up on Pennsylvania Inside Out, the Pennsylvania gas rush. Gas companies are rushing to acquire the rights to deep drill for natural gas across parts of Pennsylvania. This as property owners are faced with tough decisions as they consider whether or not to lease their mineral rights to the gas companies. It could end up making some Pennsylvanians rich, while others may say they didn't get enough money for their lease. We'll take a look at those issues tonight. Patty Satalia's first guest tonight is Dr. Terry Engelder, a professor of geosciences at Penn State University. He joins us to explain what brought about this gas rush and where the gas is located.
Many Pennsylvanians, as it turns out, are sitting on top of a deep deposit of natural gas known as the Marcellus Shale. Tell us a little bit about it. What is it, where is it, and how significant is this find?
Yes, Patty, the Marcellus Shale is a layer of rock that presently is between 50 and 150 feet thick. It was deposited on the order of 380 million years ago, and it contains organic material that was buried. When that organic material is subjected to temperature and pressure, it was converted to oil and natural gas, and that natural gas presently in the state of Pennsylvania is found under 34 million acres in the states of Pennsylvania, New York, West Virginia, and Ohio, and it is a very exciting resource. In fact, one of the really neat treasures.
The Marcellus Shale has actually been known for more than a century. Why the interest all of a sudden?
Well, Patty, the technology has gotten to the point where the Marcellus can be played. The significance of the Marcellus is that it's a continuous resource as opposed to a conventional reservoir. A conventional reservoir basically is found in an anticline or an upfold of rock that looks more or less like this. The conventional Marcellus, unconventional Marcellus, stretches over this 34 million acres to the extent that one can almost drill any place and expect a recovery of natural gas. However, it's in a tight shale that requires a new technology called horizontal drilling. And some of the companies, mainly Range Resources, has finally figured out how to drill an effective horizontal well in the Marcellus, and the production from that gas has been really exciting within the last couple of years.
We're talking about really deep drilling, and when you say horizontal, first they'll begin drilling vertically, as they always have, and down, what, 6, 8, even 9,000 feet, and then begin to drill horizontally?
Well, the idea here in a horizontal well is that you're still using a steel drill rod, so that in drilling the horizontal well, generally you drill to about 1,000 feet of where the formation is, and then start your curve. And in that 1,000 feet, you can take this really stiff drill pipe and turn that corner into a horizontal well. Marcellus outcrops, for example, between 6,000 and 7,000 feet underneath much of Pennsylvania, so that one would drill to about 5,500 feet vertically, then start this curve and hit the horizontal Marcellus, let's say at 6,500 feet, as they're doing up in Susquehanna County right now.
Explain the drilling and how the gas is extracted from the shale. What's unique about this shale, and how do you get the gas out of it?
Well, one of the very interesting things that happens with this particular play is that the shale itself contains a lot of fractures. Now, what you're doing is looking at the surface of a fracture right here. This is the rupture direction, and the rock requires a number of conduits, if you like. These fractures act as conduits in order for the gas to leak out of a very, very tight, impermeable rock and towards the wellbore. Obviously, with fractures, or if you like, little conduits away from the wellbore, why gas can leak to a conduit, then along a conduit to the wellbore. Now, the Marcellus is so tight that fractures like this not only are natural in the Marcellus, but the well must be stimulated, which means that companies will come along, pump a lot of high-pressure water down the well, and that water under high pressure will then add more fractures to the rock. The idea is that the more fractures that are present, the more likely it is that gas will make its way from the very tight matrix of the rock to the wellbore along fractures like this.
Describe what your contribution to all of this was.
The shale itself contains a series of natural fractures. Now, a lot of people have asked, what is the difference between this and another gas shale called the Barnett in Texas? And the Barnett largely is a play in which the best Barnett is an unfractured Barnett, whereas natural fractures in the Marcellus will enhance the recovery. They will be a guide for stimulation, for example. Those natural fractures are the things that I have studied along with a colleague of mine named Gary Lash from State University of New York at Fredonia. And the disposition of those fractures, the formation of the fractures. For example, on this fracture, you can see that the rupture started down here and fans upward like a peacock's tail, so that what you're doing is you're looking at one wall of the fracture. Fractures in situ tend to be a very, very narrow openings in rock, but once you pull the rock apart, then you see this particular peacock-tailed pattern. And I have spent my entire career studying the implications of this type of pattern in rocks.
Now, you mentioned a moment ago the Texas Barnett Shale, which went from obscurity to the most prolific domestic gas field in the continental United States. How does that compare to what we've got here in Pennsylvania?
Well, the excitement of this play, the Marcellus, is that its aerial extent is on the order of 4 times that of the Barnett. Now, the Barnett is a little bit thicker, but still I think this resource will prove to be worth 2 to 3 times as much in terms of producible natural gas.
People talk about it. The Marcellus Shale contains up to 516 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, which of course is just a number to most of us. In layman's terms, what does that mean in terms of consumption of natural gas, and how much of that is retrievable?
This 516 trillion cubic feet is a measure of the amount of gas that's there. Now, obviously, we can't recover all of it. A conservative estimate is that 10% of that will be recoverable, which is 50 trillion cubic feet. The consumption of gas by the United States right now is on the order of 23 trillion cubic feet a year, so that this is equivalent to 2 years' worth of gas supply for the entire United States. However, it can't be recovered at that rate of speed. It will take 20, 30, 40 years maybe to recover the entire resource. One of the things that's very clear is that it will not lead to energy independence. It will, however, buy a significant length of time until mankind, and Americans in particular, figure out some way of living sustainably with energy that can be continued on forever. This is a finite resource, although a very valuable one right now for the state of Pennsylvania.
Some people are calling this a supergiant gas field. You mentioned with current technology how long it will take. We can only get out 10%, but we've seen with oil wells, stripper wells, landmen are going back in, and with new technology, they're able to extract more. Is that a possibility with this as well?
Well, we've seen this with the Barnett also, which is that a well will be drilled, stimulated, and will produce for a length of time. Now, often what happens is the gas pressure will decline with time. If the well is refractured and re-stimulated, that increases the flow again and will decrease. And I have no doubt that wells in the Barnett, wells in the Marcellus, will be subjected to this re-stimulation process 2 and 3 and 4 times, extending the life of these wells to 20, 30 years in time.
What does this mean for landowners who may be leasing the rights to what's under their ground?
Well, the landowners will receive signing bonuses, but I've pointed out that, in fact, it's the royalties that the landowner will receive for a very long period of time that will really make a major impact on the state of Pennsylvania. I had a man in my office the other day, for example, that told me that the impact of the press release that I had with Gary Lash could well affect the value of this play to the farmer, for example, to a cumulative total of billions and billions of dollars, which is the truth.
Let's talk, with just a couple of seconds remaining, though, what is the beyond making a number of millionaires in Pennsylvania, what's the positive and negative impact of this find?
Well, the positive impact still is that a number of jobs will be created in the state of Pennsylvania. It certainly will have a large impact on the economy, both through the farmer who receives his royalty checks, as well as the industry that hires the drillers and pipeline men and whatnot. Negative impact, well, obviously there are the arguments about global climate change and whatnot. You're still burning a hydrocarbon. There will be a small footprint left on the surface, and of course anyone that really is concerned about what the surface looks like might complain, things like that.
All right, thanks so much for talking with us.
Good, thank you, Patty. My pleasure.
And being informed about the gas rush can make a big difference for property owners as they negotiate a lease for the mineral rights. It might make them rich, or a lack of knowledge about the subject could leave them with a bad deal. Tom Murphy, a Penn State Cooperative Extension agent based in Lycoming County, is one of the people helping Pennsylvanians find answers about the gas rush.
You're part of a team of extension agents who are out there educating landowners about the legal and practical issues involved in leasing their land for natural gas exploration and extraction. Give us an idea of how much interest there is. You're a busy man these days.
There's an incredible amount of interest out there. We've had over 13,000 landowners that have come and participated in over 50 meetings right now that come out to try to get an idea of what they should be looking at when they are reviewing a lease and how they can participate in this particular industry that's now come to Pennsylvania in a very large way.
We should mention that you're involved on both sides, really. You have land that is part of part of the Marcellus Shale Formation.
That's correct. We have a farm. We have 100 acres, and we're in an area that companies are actually very interested in doing some drilling. And our particular farm, they're actually doing some seismic work on right now. So yes, we're looking at both sides of it.
It's already been dubbed the Pennsylvania gas rush. For those who haven't read about this, give us an idea of how much interest there is and how many so-called landmen are coming to Pennsylvania to talk with landowners.
It's real hard to get an idea how many landmen that are out there. We're seeing that each individual company that might be operating in a county, for instance, could have 40, 50 landmen that are on the ground trying to sign up landowners. So then you would want to do the math on that, and there might be, in our county, for instance, in Lycoming County, there's probably somewhere between 20 and 30 companies that are there operating. So you can see how many people that is that are operating across on Broadway across Pennsylvania.
There are supposedly 20 different companies that will invest some $700 million this year. Are we going to see a lot of new millionaires in Pennsylvania as a result of this?
We're already starting to see that. We've seen it even just in Lycoming County, for instance, using that just as an example. And again, it's much broader than just Lycoming. But within Lycoming County, we're seeing tens of millions of new dollars that have come in because of the landowners that have signed leases. So that's new money that wasn't there even 6 months ago.
So some people are reporting that landmen are coming to their door. They're saying, do it now, sign a lease with me now. We won't be here a week from now. Is that disingenuous? Is time of the essence? Do people need to sign on the dotted line right now?
My opinion right now is time is your friend, and we often will say that to landowners because what we're seeing is the rates have been rising over time. We saw over a period of time, roughly about 2 years, it took to go from $15 to $300, and then within about 2 weeks' time, it went from $300 to $1,500, and now has
and we're
risen
talking
to $25
per acre.
For a 5-year contract per acre.
Okay, talk a little bit about how this is done. You say that your family owns 100 acres. What are the gas and oil companies interested in? What kinds of parcels?
What they're interested in doing first is to try to find the largest parcels. There's large blocks of ground, large farms, large land holdings of one type or another. Could be a hunting club or something of that nature. That's where they target most of their time and most of their energy as they move into an area. After that, then they start to work down to the smaller parcels, and people will ask, well, I have a 1/10 of an acre, can I participate? And the answer to that is yes. If the company is in that area and they're going to put together a drilling unit, they want to find everybody that's in that particular location to get them involved. Because they need that whole footprint. So they'll even lease down to small acreage.
Now, the average site for a drill would be about 5 acres. Talk a little bit about the power of numbers, neighbors working with one another to negotiate with the oil and gas companies.
What we've seen is that folks that have gotten together, neighbors that have gotten together and have some of these large land holdings and then gotten some of the other neighbors that might have some contiguous ground, and sometimes not even always contiguous ground. have put together some large blocks, 5, 10, 15, and even upwards. I've seen some as large as 50,000 acres, and then negotiate as one voice. They're all signing individual contracts, but they negotiate as one voice, and companies are bidding on those, and typically they'll bid a little higher on those because they don't have to put their landmen out there to put that acreage together. So it's actually cheaper for them to do that process.
Talk a little bit about things that are standard in one of these leases, and then what kinds of things landowners really should negotiate.
There's a lot of clauses in these leases because obviously the leases are written by the industry, by the oil and gas industry, and there's some favoritism because their attorneys wrote them towards the industry. What we try to do is, and one of the most important things we try to convey to people is you need to make sure that you have the lease reviewed by an attorney. People know what a car contract looks like to buy or a house contract, but when they get to one of these, they really have never seen one of these before generally, and they're lost in them. But what we've seen is statistically about 80% of the people that get one of these in front of them at that first knock at the door will actually sign one without having it reviewed. We have some examples where people have lost upwards of $1 million by not getting that good legal advice and making sure that the contract was written in their favor. Typically, we'll try to get an attorney to look through these, which is the point of advice we give, and an attorney will add somewhere between 20 and 30 different addendums to that to modify that lease to make it more favorable to the landowner. What this is about a team approach. The landowner owns the gas, they own the land, but the oil company, or the gas company in this case, has the equipment and the technology to extract it. So you need a partnership between the two. That's what we're trying to create, but fair to all parties.
Okay, and the kinds of things that might be negotiable that you might not want in your lease, or you might want extra money for, maybe water storage or oil storage, or I'm sorry, gas storage, those kinds of things.
Yeah, the three big ones that we talk about would be storage, to make sure that that's scratched out of a contract, and that's something that would be negotiated later, and gas companies are agreeable to that in most cases. Another would be a pipeline clause, to make sure that if they're running a pipeline through your property and you're not participating in the royalty, that you would have the option to negotiate that easement at a later day for a different price. And I think most importantly is the extension clauses. Most leases, as they're presented to you the first time, are going to have an extension clause that's going to allow the company to come back in and extend it at like terms and like dollars into the future. That typically does not work to the landowner's best interest. So that's something you want to modify. And
we've watched how natural gas prices have risen over the years, so to lock yourself in for 10 years down the road at today's prices doesn't make sense.
It's not a good plan. A 5-year lease with a right of first refusal in there would be a good arrangement for both the gas company and in particular for the landowners involved.
Now, the value of the shale is both in the signing bonuses and future royalties. Tell us a little bit about both.
The signing bonus typically is a paid-up bonus, and what that is that's what they're going to pay you in that check in one lump sum right up front. And that's the part that most people are so excited about. Like I said, you know, we're seeing now upwards of $2,500, and we heard some $2,700 just the other day. But we're seeing a wide range of those as you go across the state, depending upon where individuals are out there in this particular Marcellus. We're seeing them as low as $5 as you go to the southwestern corner. I think you'll see them start to rise, and that's one of the reasons we're doing our educational program. The other aspect there is the royalty, and what people need to recognize is in Pennsylvania, the royalty by state law is set at 12.5% as the minimum royalty, not the maximum. The royalty can be anything there and above. So what we're seeing now is there seems to be a new floor at around 15%. But more and more contracts are being written now, and people are negotiating, as a group that you referred to just a little bit ago, at 18%. The real money, if somebody is going to have a well drilled in their property, is in the royalty, not in the bonus check. But the bonus check is what they see first and get most excited about.
It's interesting to note that in Texas, the gas companies are required to report their production output every 6 months. In Pennsylvania, they don't need to report that for 5 years. So how can landowners know that they are getting royalties on what's actually been pumped out of their land?
Yeah, it's a real challenge for landowners to know, number one, what is the production output from a particular well because of the 5-year rule in Pennsylvania. So that really is difficult for people to have a good appreciation for that. The only way that they're going to know what is coming out of the well, even on their own property, in that 5-year period, is by the royalty check that they would be getting. And those royalty checks are going to be declining over time as the well starts to shut down in terms of production. So it's very difficult. It's a major challenge. And the other thing is that makes it hard for landowners as they're grouping together to get a good feel for what the production possibilities might be in a particular area.
Lots of people are worried about a couple of things, and we don't have a whole lot of time, but they're worried about permanent changes to the landscape. They're worried about what impact this might have on the quality of groundwater, and they're worried about what this might mean, especially for farming operations, whether they can continue to farm while this sort of exploration or excavation is going on.
Yeah, typically a well site is upwards of 5 acres, and what we're finding is a lot of companies now are trying to drill multiple wells on one well site and drill out in different directions, which is a good thing. It'll be less impact in the environment out there. The water quality aspect is something that DEP regulates here in Pennsylvania, but we need to keep in mind that the bottom of the hole where they're drilling and trying to extract the gas is typically somewhere between 5,000 and 8,000 feet below the surface. And the water quality issue deals with groundwater that's in several hundred feet below the surface. And that's cased out so that those two don't interact over time.
And we're talking about very, very deep drilling here.
It is.
You've been to Texas. Can you tell us what lessons we might learn from Texas that would apply to people getting involved in this right now here in Pennsylvania?
One of the things we learned down there, it might be going back to the aspect of time as your friend. Rates that are being paid out there for royalties in particular have risen over time. The other aspect that we brought back from down there is about sound and some of the sound intrusions that people might not have been thinking of. So making sure that you have something in your lease that deals with sound issues. So there's a whole lot of those things that we need to make sure that are in a lease and make sure that it's written well to protect you, because what is very critical is once you sign a lease, it's a done deal, it's a legal contract, and you're tied into it.
All right, thanks so much for talking with us.
And if you have questions about the Pennsylvania gas rush, or would just like to learn more about the subject and its possible long-term effects in Pennsylvania, WPSU is putting together a special one-hour program titled Pennsylvania's Gas Rush. We are bringing together a panel of experts who will answer your questions live tomorrow night at 7 right here on WPSU. You can call in during the show, or you can submit your questions live online at WPSU.org/gasrush. during that same hour. And that's going to wrap things up for this edition of Pennsylvania Inside Out. For all of us here, have a good night.